vulnerability, I would never have stepped outside of my comfort zone and took, and even like it ties into loving my body as well.
Totally.
That has been because of vulnerability, and so doing the things that kind of scare us allow us to step into that fear and learn from it, and then possibly overcome it. And there's just so much power in that.
Absolutely, and
freedom in that.
Yeah, I think ultimately we can say that vulnerability is a key to our freedom. One of the keys.
Absolutely.
That kind of unlock, our ability to be. And when we talk about freedom, maybe we can clarify that for a second.
Go ahead.
When we talk about freedom, it means not being bound by any kind of conditioning or not being bound by any limiting beliefs in your own mind,
and not being bound by guilt or shame as well.
Totally, yeah.
There's some research out about vulnerability and how when you become vulnerable, guilt and shame cannot exist in that state.
Wow, that's amazing.
Yeah, I'll
elaborate on that.
There's I forget her name, but she's like that. Her whole life's work is studying guilt, shame, and vulnerability.
Oh my God, amazing.
Yeah, I'll find her name at some point and I'll let you know in the next video or something.
Awesome. Vulnerability, because it includes, a few other really, really important things like honesty. You can't really be vulnerable unless you're being honest. They kind of go together in a way, and you have to be honest with yourself to bring yourself to a place of vulnerability where you're open enough to express yourself and to really honestly look at whatever you're going through, or to even communicate whatever you're going through. Because I think being vulnerable is an expressive thing in a way, where you're communicating or some way acknowledging what you're going through, what's inside.
To me, vulnerability is an act of strength and courage, and when it's almost like doing something that we don't want to do or that we're really fearful of, but doing it anyway because we know it's going to be really good for us. And so in that space of honesty, being honest with yourself about, okay, this is really good for me, even though I'm freaked out about it, I'm going to do it anyway. And just practicing vulnerability in this way, it becomes easier and easier to really honor yourself and step into this place of power. You're empowering yourself when you're vulnerable.
Absolutely.
And you're putting yourself out there, even though it scares the shit out of you. And in doing this, we get more comfortable with being vulnerable, and we learn so much about ourselves.
Yeah, and you can even say that, being vulnerable is a state of being authentic. Where it's the fear that comes up is a fear of revealing what's true about you to yourself or to others. That fear that comes through. So that's why I think it probably feels so empowering. It's because you're finally being authentic. You're finally being who you really are. You're finally expressing actually what you're going through. You're accepting your feelings. You're accepting your beliefs, and opening up about them and expressing them. And it feels so good to honestly be yourself. And
it really does.
Yeah, I think it's a huge part of this journey.
And I think it's so important to practice this in ways. And so maybe we can speak about how to practice vulnerability.
Yeah.
So for me, for an example, to give an example, you probably know by now, if you've been listening to our videos, that I struggled with body image growing up, and something that really allowed me to return to love for my body was being vulnerable. And so I started taking videos of myself dancing, with my belly hanging out, and then like posting it on YouTube, on Instagram. And this small act of vulnerability was such a powerful tool for me to step into loving my body and loving myself again. And so I continued doing this, even though I was like really terrified to post these vulnerable videos of myself.
Yeah.
They encouraged me so much and like motivated me, and I really got like great feedback too, which motivated me further. But even if I didn't get positive feedback, like I wasn't even really focusing on that. It was like all for myself. I was doing it all for me, and so that's an example of practicing vulnerability. Another example would be like leading ceremony, for example. Like I that was another thing that I was so fearful of, but I did it anyway. And same with like teaching yoga. Like that opportunity opened up for me to teach yoga before I thought that I was ready, but I trusted that the universe was giving me this opportunity for a reason. And so even though it just scared the shit out of me, I was like, I'm gonna do it anyway. And it has been such a beautiful learning experience. Even though I felt like I wasn't completely ready to do it, my students were my teachers as well. And it was such a beautiful experience. And just to trust when an opportunity is open for you, you know, and you know it'll be good for you to step into that role that's being offered to you.
Totally.
Bless.
Excuse me. Yeah, and for me, because the masculine presence and energy inside of me was dominating my life for so long, for me it was necessary to like put that aside, because that was about repressing feelings and not allowing and not expressing them, and in fact and expressing other feelings or other energies, such as like even like anger and stuff like that, was things that were tools to like cover up the truth about what I was going through. I dealt a lot with self-worth stuff and depression, and like just being self-conscious about just who I was and not feeling confident in expressing myself in any way, really. I mean, in some ways, in certain parts of my life. But for me, becoming vulnerable, I had to find people that I could be vulnerable with. That was something that was really important for me, because what led to my further suppressing my feelings and my authenticity ultimately was not being surrounded by people who supported me and being judged by people when I did express myself. So that was a big thing too, which is all a reflection of my own inner, how I treated myself. So I attracted those people into my life because I wasn't yet treating myself with that degree. I wasn't being honest with myself yet. So the people that I was surrounded by just reflected that. So it's not like it's anybody's fault or anything like that. It's not like they were bad people. They were just doing their job and showing me part of myself that I needed to look at. So that's kind of where it began. And we spoke about, we'll get into this a little bit more at some other point maybe, but we talked yesterday, Lexi and I were just kind of sharing our life stories with each other. And one of the things that was really important for me right before a major transformation was accepting that a lot of what I was experiencing was fear-based. And like my whole presence in the world before accepting that was the opposite of fear, was making sure nobody knew I was ever afraid of anything. I wasn't allowed to experience fear, because that was just like the persona that I was projecting all over the place. That manifested as depression, because not accepting myself and my feelings for what they were led to depression, because I wasn't able to express it. It wasn't able to release, so it just sat in there and rotted inside of me. And other times it would get inflamed, and then it would manifest as violence and anger and things like that. And these are all just what happens when you suppress your feelings, you know, that just erupts out of you in certain ways. And so it was this one thing. I had to make an internal shift and start to really just be honest about how I was feeling. Be like, you know what, I'm afraid of this and that. I'm afraid of having conversations with people. I have anxiety, like, very often. Okay, now that I accept that and honor that, now what can I do? You know?
Wow.
And then I just started treating myself better and appreciating that and like caring for myself a little bit. And then just little by little, the more and deeper I got into being vulnerable and honest with myself, the more I started to attract people into my life that can support me in the same way. And that's when I was really started to be able to open up, was when, you know, through my treating myself better, having people come into my life that could offer me the same kind of presence. And that's when I really started to do some really beautiful work, when that started to open up.
Really beautiful. I love your story. Kind of remind me of the first time that I was ever vulnerable. I held so much shame and guilt surrounded by my prior choices of and the way that I allowed myself to be treated by men, and the way that I treated myself. I held a lot of guilt and shame surrounding my sexuality when I was I would say I was 19 at this point. And I held that inside of me, and I pushed it down, and I didn't communicate about it with anyone. I was so ashamed. And finally, I was doing AA at the time, and there was this women's group, this all women's group, that I finally felt, I wouldn't say comfortable, because it was still very uncomfortable, but I finally felt like I could open up about this. And just speaking it out loud and expressing yourself, expressing the shame and guilt.
Yeah.
It cannot exist there. And there was an instant release that I felt. And it's I no longer had to hold it all inside of me anymore.
Wow. That's beautiful. And I love what you're saying about I lost it.
Yeah.
Sorry, I'm feeling
It's okay. Yeah, and how you said that surrounding yourself with people that will create space for you to be vulnerable is so important. Creating sacred space for yourself is so important, and you can hold that space for yourself.
You have to. It really won't work out unless you're able to do that. Unless you can really bring yourself to that space within yourself. You're not going to find it out in the world. You can seek all over the place. You might catch it here and there in little doses by grace of some kind, but you really have to. It's absolutely vital to do the work inside, to really get the full experience of what happens when you're vulnerable. Because again, like I was saying, there was moments where I was able to do it outwardly and express it to people at times, but then there was major shutdowns during those expressions for a few reasons. One, because I have yet to attract the right people into my life who could accept me that way. And two, a lot of times what happens is if you don't have a healthy relationship with yourself, you have intense feelings and you express through those feelings, and that's like a toxic way to express yourself, kind of. So the way that you present what you're feeling inside often isn't, it's difficult to receive in a compassionate way because of how it comes out. At least that's what I experienced.
So we're getting into feelings a little bit,
yeah,
and allowing ourselves to feel, but also taking the time to separate, create space between feeling and expression. If you're going to be communicating feelings with other people,
yes,
that's really important.
That's huge.
To just create that space and separate the two, so that you can communicate from a whatever it is, whatever emotion it is, it can be very intimidating to the listener.
Yeah.
And the listener will put up these walls and not be able to hear what you're saying. So that is so important.
Yeah.
It's such a beautiful thing. And just to touch on feelings again, this has been such a huge practice in my life, is honoring my feelings.
Yeah.
And when you don't honor your feelings, you'll feel them in your body. You'll feel, you won't feel right. When you're not honoring your emotions and feelings, you'll feel discomfort within yourself. And until you allow your feelings to kind of come up and honor them, you're going to remain in that state of like this tense, nasty, yeah, it'll feel different depending on the feeling. But once I started finally honoring my feelings as valid, rather than pushing them away, like, oh, you're too much, Lexi. You're feeling way too much. No, I'm feeling something for a reason, and my feelings are valid and they're important to me because I'm feeling them, and I honor and love myself enough to express what I'm feeling, and sometimes the feeling is just for myself, and I can express my feelings through movement. And other times, if they're involving someone, again, it's so important to come from a place of neutrality so they can really hear you. But it is so important to communicate what you're feeling, and you can take like a few days and really get clear with how you want to communicate it. That's okay, but to honor yourself and communicate, so important for your well-being and for the well-being of your relationships.
Totally. These are key features to, I mean, we're just talking about an overall, like, general wellness inside yourself, you know, and this is like across the board. This is mentally and psychologically, and this is even physically, because of how related the mind and the body are, you know. We create so much physical issue by storing emotions and things like that.
Yeah, a lot of the pain in our body comes from stored memories and emotions that we're denying ourselves to look at, you know.
Yeah, and opening yourself up to this is something that can, like we were saying, you can actually experience freedom. I remember when I was finally started really doing this stuff, and when I realized how important it was to do this, it was like being free for the first time. It was like an incredible experience, because even in moments where I felt like I was good before doing this kind of work, even moments where I felt good that I can remember, there was still like this lingering. I remember talking about this when I was younger, when I started to accept my depression. Actually, it was during that kind of era where I was just accepting that I had depressive habits, not even doing anything about it, but just saying, you know what, I'm fucking depressed like all the time. One thing I noticed, that no matter what, even when I was happy, there was this lingering melancholy, there was this lingering sadness. That depression was literally never gone at this point in my life. And it was something that was like, and part of that was because even in moments where like that stuff wasn't bubbling up, whatever I needed to release wasn't bubbling up anywhere, and it felt okay, it still was there. And it still needed to be released. This was before you
got honest with yourself about it?
This is before in practicing vulnerability and doing this kind of work. And it wasn't until doing this, it wasn't until being honest and expressing myself and allowing myself to be vulnerable and to really put myself out there was when that started to fade, and I started to experience like really genuine happiness. And I don't think I experienced it before that.
Wow.
Yeah.
And this comes with awareness too.
Yeah.
Once you build the awareness to bring your depression to light, then you can choose to walk with it. We were talking about this the other day, and do something about it. But when there's no awareness there, you're just kind of sinking in it. I won't even like think that I'm depressed. I'll just be like sitting in the depression and not aware of it. And then as soon as I realize, oh, I'm kind of depressed right now, and I should change my environment, I should change my atmosphere, like go for a walk and get some fresh air and do something. Like I find when I'm in a depressed state, that movement is like the hardest for me, but it's the best thing for me. So I force myself to get up out of bed and just go for a walk outside, even though everything in me is like, it's really cold outside, you should really just stay in bed. Like, I just have to push past those voices in my head and move. And for me, that really changes my state very quickly.
That's beautiful, and I can relate to, when you're in an environment, let's just say you're depressed in a room, right? Or with any feeling, this doesn't just have to be, but it's a good example. You're there and you're just kind of wallowing, and because I've experienced this too, where the last thing you want to do is get up and move out of that room for whatever reason. It's kind of a weird thing, but that's what happens often. And the more you do that, you extend the duration of time that you're going to be in that depressive state. So just something as simple as going into another room. I mean, and especially going outside for like a walk or something like that. Nature, especially, even just being outside, has such healing abilities, especially just for your mood. And then also getting your blood flowing in your body. It literally will enliven your body and improve your mood. It's like it's so basic, and so fundamental. Like the more you move the body around and release all the fluids and energies and all that kind of stuff.
Yes, and we can do another video on some movement techniques that you can do to get the blood flowing, like what we did today, the little bit of qigong where we were pounding our body. That is such a beautiful way to start every day and get your blood flowing. So we can do a whole little video on that. That'll be fun.
Yeah, and it's so simple. So maybe we can tie up this talk of vulnerability a little bit.
Yes.
So the qualities of vulnerability are honesty, right? Acceptance, ultimately authenticity, of expression towards yourself and ultimately towards others. And it's really about honoring everything and accepting everything for what it is and releasing it ultimately. So in other words, expressing it. I think vulnerability requires a degree of expression.
It definitely does.
In whatever way. So, again, making sure that you're able to really, really do this with yourself in a kind way, right? It's so important your self-talk in this kind of subject, that you talk to yourself kindly, that you care about yourself, because that's what's going to allow you to attract people into your life that will be able to offer you that. And I feel it's really, really important to have a degree of compassion and kindness when you're allowing yourself to be vulnerable, as opposed to being judged or something like that. You really don't want to have any of that in your environment, so you can really, really heal and really release whatever's necessary to come through and come up.
Yes. Be gentle with yourself in the process of being vulnerable. Create a sacred space for yourself to be able to express your vulnerable and be vulnerable, and surround yourself with people that will support you in this action, and just that vulnerability is going to allow you to grow and expand.
Yeah, it's worth it.
And love and accept yourself in a completely new way. And so maybe just taking small little steps of vulnerability, that can lead to huge shifts. Yeah. You can start small.
And it's good to start small, to get your practice done on stuff that's not too deep or too troubled. Again, it depends on your temperament. Like for me, I like to go right into the hard stuff. that's just my nature. But it's good. It's really healthy and really good to start with little things and then work through them and then kind of develop your process, you know, of what it means to allow yourself to come into a vulnerable state, and know that, again, like I just said, it's worth fighting through the resistance to do it. It's worth fighting. And again, even if you get met with somebody who doesn't support you, don't stop. Don't let that stop you from being vulnerable. Like, be vulnerable, be fearlessly vulnerable. And if people don't accept you, that's their thing, and that's okay. And you can just know that that's not the type of person to continue to be vulnerable with. You know, there's some people that are going to support you, and there's some people that aren't, potentially, in your life. And if people don't support your vulnerability and aren't there for you in the way that you need, then don't be vulnerable with them anymore. You don't need to put yourself through that. And if you don't have anybody in your life that's able to do that, then really take a deep look in yourself and just take that time to do your own individual work inside towards yourself. And then I guarantee that you'll attract people into your life from doing that.
Mm-hmm. You are not alone. We are all moving through this. We are all, you know, working through something where we can step into vulnerability. So just remember that you are not alone in anything that you experience, and that you are loved.
Yeah, and know that thank you for saying that, because this kind of offers an opportunity where you know, just because Lexi and I are talking about this stuff doesn't by any means mean we haven't mastered. You know, we're on the front lines with everybody. We're on the front lines of this work with everybody else that's out there, and it's a lifelong journey. This kind of stuff never stops. It never ends. We're sharing this stuff because we're working through our own stuff, and we're talking about what works for us, and it's working, and it's a miracle, and it's amazing. But just know that you're not alone in having work to do on yourself. You know, it's nothing to be ashamed of. It's nothing to feel guilty about. And just know that you are fully supported. And there's like the entire world is a shared community of people working on their own shit.
The work never ends, and that's the beauty of life, is that we're continuously working and learning and growing and expanding in new ways that we may not even have known were possible. And this is all a part of the journey, and this is all a part of the work. Us talking about it is a part of us being vulnerable and stepping into our purpose here, you know, and that's a really vulnerable space to be in, and it feels so good. It feels really good.
It really does. So thank you for listening, and again, and as always, feel free to communicate and reach out and connect with us if you're new to being vulnerable, or if it's scary for you, reach out. Even reach out to us. You know, we'd be happy to support you in whatever way we can. And you know, find your loved ones, know your tribe. You know, learn the people that you can be vulnerable with and connect with them, and really don't be afraid to reach out when you're in need. So
yes.
All right.
Yes,
Much love.
We're here for you.
Yeah.
We're here to listen. So much love, so much gratitude.
Yeah. Thanks for sharing this moment in time with us. Many blessings to you on your journey.